Hello everyone and welcome to Bicycle Network's Top 10s of Bike Riding, Phrases, Facts and Figures. I'm Craig Richards, I'm the CEO of Bicycle Network, and today we're looking into the top 10 answers to the question, why are bikes the best transport solution? So here we go with number 10. The case for bikes is simple. Not only is it the most cost, space and energy efficient means of transport, it's also the most healthy, and in urban environments, it's usually the quickest way to get where you need to go. What we know is that when people decide how are they going to move around in our cities particularly, the most important factor they always turn to is convenience. What's the most convenient way to get from point A to point B? But we know there's another factor as well that really plays on people that no one's prepared to admit, and that's called the cool factor. What is it that other people do? Because as humans, we always follow what our contemporaries do. We like to follow what our neighbours do. We don't like to stand out. I remember specifically that when a transport planner from Nigeria came to Australia, he said to me, if I rode my bike everywhere, everyone would think I'd lost all my money. So that what we know is when it comes to deciding how do we move around, this factor of humans following other humans is really important. Okay, number 9. On a bike, you always get a seat. And that picture really does tell many words, doesn't it? Particularly in our current environment with COVID-19. The last thing you want to be doing is jammed on public transport under someone's armpit. It's a place that you'd be thinking, I really don't have my physical distance. This quote came out of a study we did from a company called Cobalt, who had a look at people and we asked them what's one of the big things that they find most important about getting on a bike, and having a seat. It's certainly something we all look forward to. On to number 8. People in traffic have been found to be more stressed than fighter pilots and riot police. This one came out of a study done by Hewlett-Packard, and what they found was that the stress people are under is extraordinary when they're in traffic. And we've all had that moment. And they put those caps on people's heads with those electrodes, and they found that that stress in traffic was even worse than being faced by a riot. Because at that moment, our body floods with the chemical called cortisol. And that's an important chemical. We need that chemical. It's part of our flight, fight or freeze response. But you don't want that chemical in your body for a long time. So if you're in traffic for an hour with cortisol, it's a really terrible thing. On to number 7. Cars take up 7 times as much space as bikes. In the space it takes to move 2,000 people by car, you can move 9,000 people by bus and 14,000 people by bike. This photo really does tell a good story here too. This is called the Munster photo. It was taken in Germany and has been recreated a number of times throughout the world. And when we look at that photo, we just see how space is such a big factor in our cities and how much space is actually taken up if we put people in cars. Because when it comes to cars, the thing with cars is the average occupancy of a car, it's only just over 1 person per car. Most cars just have a single person in them. And here's another thing to think about. When it comes to, we talk about the future and we talk about electric cars. With electric cars, it's going to take up just as much space. And then we talk about autonomous cars. That's going to take up even more space because then that number will drop below 1. It's thought to be around 0.8 because at that moment, there's going to be a lot of cars just driving around with no human in them at all. On to number 6. An average car commute costs society $10. An average bike commute saves society $10. When we add up all the costs that are involved, the fuel, the infrastructure, the machine, all those costs, and particularly when we deduct from them the health savings that come from people being physically active on their bike, we just see this massive difference and there's this huge disparity here. So no doubt as a society, we're much better off financially if people are on their bikes rather than in their cars. I know a couple of years ago we proposed that some of that money in Australia should actually be returned to the person riding their bike, and we proposed that they should be paid half that saving, only $5 a day. And of course that caused a bit of controversy, but plenty of places around the world have realised that, and as a result they are actually making a financial contribution back to the person who's riding their bike. Number 5, adding lanes to deal with congestion is like loosening your belt to cure obesity. Lewis Mumford. Have a look at that photo. That's from the Katy Freeway in Houston, Texas. See how many lanes there are. And that's one of those classic examples where what they did was they spent billions of dollars widening the road So as a result of that, the thought was it's going to be quicker for people to get around. But guess what happened? It just made it slower. There's this phenomenon that we talk about called induced demand, which basically says if you build for cars, guess what? You just get more cars. Everyone falls for this trick and they spend money widening roads, building freeways. It passes in Australia what I call the barbecue test. When people get around a barbecue and they're talking about things and they're talking about their worries and they say, oh, the congestion, it's driving me crazy. And someone says, we just need to widen the road. And everyone goes, yeah, we just need to widen the road. But in Australia, we still think that, even though we know full well, there's so many examples that shows it just doesn't work. Time for number 4. The United Nations recommends spending at least 20% of your transport budget on active travel. Australia spends less than 2%. Here we are in Australia, we just keep spending our money on planes, trains and automobiles. We're so far behind and we just keep falling further behind. We spend this roughly 2%. We need to spend a lot more on active transport if we are going to make sure that people can ride bikes to get where they need to go. Number 3, 60% of all car trips are less than 5 kilometres. This distance is very rideable for any person of average fitness. When it comes to people who don't ride their bike for transport and you ask them why they don't, the first thing people usually go to is, oh, it's just too far. Because what they know is they think about the person who they see, the Lycra warrior, riding down a main road, Lycra up with their clip-in shoes, who's grinding out 30 kilometres every day, and they think, I just can't possibly do that. But it's not what we're talking about here. With most of these transport trips, they can be done by ordinary people in their normal everyday clothes on a normal everyday bike. On to number 2. Here's the opportunity. 3.4 million Australians ride a bike every week, but less than 200,000 ride to work. When people think about getting people riding for transport, everyone thinks we need to teach them to ride, but the reality is we have this huge number of people here in Australia who are ready to ride a bike. They ride their bike regularly anyway, they just ride it for recreation instead of transport. So this is a massive opportunity. How do we convert one sort of rider into another? They have a bike, they know how to ride, we just have to make sure that they're comfortable riding for transport. And that, of course, leads us in to number 1, our biggest reason here. Number 1, 59% of people are interested in riding a bike, but they're concerned. They're concerned about trucks and cars. This one comes out of Portland, Oregon, and this is known as the Portland model, that we have this huge number of people who want to ride a bike, but they are concerned, and what they're most concerned about is trucks, cars. They're concerned about getting hit. They're concerned about not coming home. So our biggest thing is, how do we get more people riding for transport? That's the concern we have to deal with. Which takes us to the subject of our next top 10, the top 10 answers to the question, how to provide better places for people to ride bikes. But before you go, just let us know, what did you think of this top 10? Contact us through Facebook, Instagram or Twitter. We'd love to know what you thought. Thanks so much and look forward to seeing you next time for our top 10 series.